YouTubers are awful. We put these cheap builds together and tell you how much they cost us, but by the time we've recorded, edited and uploaded the video, the market's changed, this special one-off deal we told you about has long since ended, or everyone else who watched the video before you went and bought the entire stock. Well, in this video, okay, with the best of intentions, I'm probably going to end up doing exactly the same thing. Here's a £420 gaming PC you can hopefully buy today. There are a few good options for CPUs on the used market today that aren't based on dead architectures and require obsolete motherboards. My choice here is the Ryzen 5 1500X, which I picked up on AliExpress for £69 including tax. Although a 4-core 8-thread Zen 1 CPU isn't exactly a gaming powerhouse in 2021, it is more than a match for the pre-Skylake Intel chips usually available at around this price point, and offers a healthy upgrade path in the future. If AliExpress have sold out by the time you see this, or prices have gone up, a Ryzen 5 1400 is a lower clocked version that will perform just as well in the majority of games. Depending on the health of your local used market, you might even be able to pick up a Ryzen 5 1600 with 2 extra cores for a similar price. The stock AMD Wraith Stealth CPU coolers are more than adequate for keeping the CPUs operating in the 60s and low 70s, and can be found on eBay for under £10. There isn't much need to go more expensive than this with the setup we have here, and cheaper options will usually have some sort of caveat. Either they'll be poor performance, loud as a hairdryer, or both. A320 motherboards are the most economical options for the AM4 socket. Being the bottom of the stack usually means they have some compromises. For a start, all A320 boards omit the option to manually overclock the CPU, and won't run CPUs newer than the 3000 series, even with the latest BIOS updates. However, if you just want a game and aren't too worried about the limited upgrade path, boards like this MSI A320 are available for less than £35 on eBay, even brand new in some cases. 8GB kits of DDR4-3000, like this Team Group kit, are getting less common these days, but if you hunt around you can find them new for about £45 and used for £35 or less on eBay. Some people will tell you that 8GB of RAM isn't enough in 2021, and they're almost correct. You will get better performance with 16GB of RAM in a lot of games, but some of that performance difference can be made up for with your storage. For budget builds, I usually recommend a combination of small SSD and large hard drive. The SSD only needs to be about 120GB, and these can be had for £15 on eBay or from used retailers like CEX. This only needs to house your operating system, your page file, and maybe your favourite game, so long as it's not Warzone or GTA 5 or something. I've made a video here where I talk more about RAM, SSDs and page files if you wanted to know more about it. 120GB is of course not enough for modern gaming, so a 1TB hard drive for about £20 is an ideal starting point. I got mine from CEX as they offer a 2-year warranty, but they should also be pretty plentiful on eBay. My case and power supply here are both budget options from AeroCool and cost me a combined total of £55, evenly split. The PSU is a 400 watt 80 plus white unit with 360 watts on the 12V line, so although it has a PCIe connector, I don't intend to use it. The case has some large basic rainbow LED fans, a vented front, tempered glass side, and overall acceptably flimsy construction for the price. I only spent as much as I did on the case because I have to sell this thing after I've made the video. You might find it better to pick up an even cheaper case from Amazon without the fancy extras and put the money you save towards a more reliable EVGA PSU instead. And all that just leaves the tough part. Enough words have been wasted on the topic of the 2021 GPU market to make an American filibuster, so I'll keep this pretty vague. I set the system budget at £420, a number I pulled out of my ass, and that has absolutely no hidden meanings whatsoever, and so far I've spent about £230 of it. The best GPU I could find that fit into my remaining budget was a used GTX 1650 GDDR6, which I picked up from CEX. These cards don't exactly grow on trees right now, so for your build, an RX 470 or 484GB, GTX 970 or 1063GB should all make for similarly priced and potentially higher performance alternatives, though in that case you'd want to spend more than I did on the power supply. This PC can give a pretty good experience in Red Dead Redemption 2, running at 1080 balanced averages 46 FPS, with lows dropping to about 24. Those looking for a 60 FPS experience will have to spend some time tweaking settings, but it shouldn't be too hard, as the Ryzen 5 1500X is only operating at about half to two-thirds capacity. Resident Evil Village offers a smooth experience at 1080 with the balanced or performance presets, though the former pushes past the card's VRAM limit, and trying to keep below 4GB means that sometimes textures look like, well, absolute ass. In fact, using the graphics priority preset and quality FSR, I was still getting a very impressive 88 FPS average, until I wasn't, and the game slowed down into the 40s for several seconds before returning to normal. Even with AMD's much vaunted FSR, it's wise to keep an eye on the VRAM usage bar and adjust your settings accordingly. You may be forgiven for mistaking this for a certain other light fantasy cartoon style third-person action game, though of course that game isn't normally available on PC. Like that game, Immortals: Fenyx Rising plays just fine at 30 FPS, so the fact that this PC can play it at high settings with very high textures at 45 FPS average isn't to its detriment at all. We're not CPU bound here, so dropping settings should allow for a 60 FPS average if you prefer. Control manages to keep its moody atmosphere and immersive art style regardless of quality settings, so running at medium isn't too much of a sacrifice here. Doing so at 1080 gives an average FPS of 46 and lows of 39. Dropping internal resolution to 720 would get you closer to 60, though the game's temporal anti-aliasing solution does tend to soften detail a lot. Jedi Fallen Order is just one of those games. Although this PC can run the game perfectly well at 1080 medium settings, keeping an average of 60 FPS, the way the game handles level streaming means frame times frequently spike. I remain hopeful that Respawn are working on a solution to this, as they seem to still be working on the game in the light of the 9th gen consoles, but for the time being I think any Star Wars fans looking to play this game might want to invest in a bigger SSD. Although I prefer Forza Horizon 4 overall, Dirt 5 plays extremely well, looks great, has an excellent soundtrack, and is included in Games Pass, so it's well worth a try. But this isn't a review, so you want to know how it plays on this PC. Well, it turns out Dirt 5 is pretty demanding, with 1080 high only giving a 45 FPS average. In fact, I actually had to drop quality as far as 720 medium to get over 60 FPS average in the canned benchmark. Speaking of demanding games, Crysis Remastered seemingly still has some of its 2008 code affecting CPU performance, so the Ryzen 1500X benefits from turning physics and water quality down to low. Aside from these tweaks, the 1080 medium preset keeps an average frame rate of well above 60 FPS, and the game still looks pretty good. Valorant remains a CPU benchmark as much as anything, at least above a certain tier of hardware. The first gen Ryzen is a pretty big jump over the Xeon in my last build, giving a 135 FPS average, up from the 102 FPS in the cheaper PC. For contrast, the Ryzen 3 3100 I use in my graphics card tests can reach about 175 to 180 FPS, though that CPU costs about £35 to £50 more than this one. Destiny 2 isn't a particularly demanding game, and this PC is capable of running it at over 60 FPS, even at 1080 with high settings and fancy effects. It is, however, incompatible with MSI Afterburner, and I neglected to pay attention to how much the CPU is being used, so I don't know whether dropping settings would increase FPS further, or if I had room to turn resolution up to 1440. My gut reaction is that I wasn't CPU limited here, and that dropping resolution would result in a higher frame rate if you prefer. I made a bit of a rookie error with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I usually test at 1080 and either medium or high settings, though this time I tested at 1440 with 70% scaling. This resulted in a 1792 by 1008 resolution and a 54 FPS average in the canned benchmark. From my previous test of the GTX 1650 in my reasonably priced gaming PC, I know that full 1080 should run at about 51 FPS on this card, and will look a tiny bit sharper than the footage you're seeing here. Those of you who've been keeping an eye on the Riva Tuner overlay will have noticed that there's a bit of an imbalance in temperatures here. The Ryzen 5 has been running beautifully in the high 50s and low 60s. This is in part because I'm not overly stressing the CPU. We don't have overclocking or precision boost overdrive to push clock speeds higher than stock, and the case has plenty of unfiltered ventilation around this area. The GPU though is running pretty damn hot. This is just about within the comfort zone of this GPU, and its clock speeds are still fully able to boost up as the system demands it. Looking at the same card in the slightly more premium Aero 1 mini case, however, this extra slot's worth of space below the GPU allows it to run about 3 to 5 degrees cooler. Like I said, this is within the GPU's comfort zone, but if it's not within yours, you may want to consider either undervolting the card or investing in a case with better airflow. Of course, the budget was the principal factor in this build, and all things considered, I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. My next PC build is going to have about a £200 higher budget, and should be a bit more premium than this one. Keep an eye on the channel for that video in the near future. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.